Another data store is Azure Cosmos DB. Let's look at that one. Cosmos DB is a database, and as with everything in Azure, it is massive scale and it is distributed. And is also NoSQL, so it doesn't work with tables with rows and columns. The interesting thing is that you can access data in Cosmos DB using several APIs, depending on what you like. These include a SQL-like API, MongoDB, Gremlin, and more. So if you use a MongoDB right now, you could just change your connection string to point to a Cosmos DB and it will work. Very cool. Because this doesn't work with tables with rows and columns, you don't need to figure out a data scheme before you start. Also, indexes on data are automatically created, although you can tweak them. You can run Cosmos DB serverless, which means that it only runs when you need it and only costs money then. You can also run it differently, where you pay all month. Besides the APIs that you can use, another differentiator of Cosmos DB is that you can use it for geo-replicated scenarios. You can do this with all the databases like Azure SQL as well, but Cosmos DB can have writable nodes in each geographic region that you replicate data to. I know, this might sound like gibberish to you now. I'll explain this in more details in other courses. Alright, let's see it. Here in the Azure portal, we'll create a new Azure Cosmos DB account. Look, here it is. Let's create it. And here is the first choice to make. Which API do we want to use to access data? Let's pick the NoSQL one, so the SQL-like API. And again, this is the create blade. As always, we need to choose a resource group, so basically a folder, to put this in. Okay, also I'll give it a name, like this. As with other services, this name needs to be unique because it will be the basis for its DNS name and URL. By the way, you can also choose to not expose Azure services directly to the internet, but only to other Azure services or your on-premises services. Alright, so I've picked a region. And now how its capacity or compute and storage power works. I'll pick serverless, like I mentioned earlier. I can also configure other things, like the global distribution of Cosmos DB instances, but let's leave this like it is and create it. Again, I'll skip to when it is done. This can take several minutes. Here it is, the Azure Cosmos DB. Let's go to the Data Explorer. As this one is empty, we'll use this quick start. This creates a sample database with a container in it and some data. Let's see what happens. That's it, it's done. Cosmos DB has a database that can have multiple containers with items in it, like you can see here. These are the items or documents in the container. They are JSON-based and contain all sorts of information and fields. Also, a container in a database can have things like stored procedures, user-defined functions, and triggers, just like a SQL database. You can also tweak the settings and the indexing of data if you want. Here it is, your first taste of Azure Cosmos DB.